It was April 10th, 2018. I answered the phone. It was my doctor. Salim, the report is back. It's a tumor. We need you to get a biopsy to see if it's malignant or benign. Guys, I blacked out. All I could think was how my life was going to change. Everything that had mattered up to this point seemed to fade in an instant. The only things that came to mind were the things that mattered most. The people that mattered most, my wife, my kids. The what ifs dominated my mind. What if I had cancer? What if I died? What's going to happen to my family? My business? I was completely paralyzed with fear. And I asked God, why me? And as I sat in my car trying to process what I had heard, it was intense. My year had already hit me square in the face. We had lost a baby in February. We had hit a wall financially. My business was facing major adversity. I was in the middle of making a decision professionally that would single-handedly change the trajectory for the good or for the bad, and it was extremely risky. I had no idea what I was dealing with. Things were falling apart around me. A lot of people that had been in my inner circle were turning away, and at this point, I had never felt so alone. So as I sat in silence, I was forced to cry out to God. I remember feeling so distant from Him. I felt like He was nowhere to be found. It was one of those moments when I needed to hear from the Lord, and it was eerily quiet. My faith was being tested in a way that I had never experienced. I was doing all the right things. I was serving, I was giving, pursuing the Lord, yet here I was facing adversity. Adversity I wasn't expecting. Those next few weeks, they were brutal. Doctor's appointments, testing, and lots of questions that remained to be answered, all while going through some of the darkest days of my professional career. Here I was, that bold lion, as I always proclaim, feeling small and weak. That roar, it was quiet. I spent days questioning the strength of my faith, and I just pleaded with God to show up. I remember that following Friday as I walked into the Mayo Clinic and I sat across from the surgeon and saw how rattled he looked when he saw the images of my ankle and told me what he saw disturbed him and he wanted to get a stat biopsy to see what it was. I was undone. I knew it was not going to be a good result. I just knew the report was going to come back negative and I was going to be dealing with a cancerous tumor in my ankle. So as I sat there in the parking lot of Mayo Clinic after the biopsy, fear gripped me to the point of tears. I just sat there and cried, and it seemed like hours. It was just me and God. And immediately God spoke to me and said, praise me in the good and praise me in the bad. So this was a pivotal point. It had been a week since I heard the news and the anxiety was too much. At this point, I thought of how bold I had been as I stood on the mountaintop in victory when things were going great. And now that I was in the valley, I shuddered with fear. The Lord was good to remind me of Psalm 23 and how He is the good shepherd and He would protect me and He would give me rest. No matter the outcome, I needed to show the world that my faith, it would not be broken. So that weekend, I made the decision to change my mind and run after God instead of running from Him. I jumped into the Word, and Philippians was where I was led. I read about Paul and how he rejoiced in his suffering and how that produced faith. So here was Paul facing death, sitting in jail, chained up for Jesus, beaten, shipwrecked, and he was rejoicing in his suffering? How? How could anyone rejoice when they suffer? And this was the question that just changed my whole perspective. Rejoicing in our suffering it's not natural. In a culture that craves comfort, craves health and wealth and security, I was just wrestling with this idea. But God, He kept reminding me that rejoicing in the midst of suffering, it focuses our attention on the knowledge of what the Spirit produces in us through that suffering. The result is threefold. Suffering produces endurance. Endurance produces character. And character produces hope. Here was Paul living this out. I wanted that type of hope. But was I willing to follow that example? So I went into the next week awaiting biopsy results, facing a very hard business decision that would bring trials in ways I never thought were possible. Trials that plagued me for a long time. And I had decided, the Lord had spoken, and I was obeying him. I would live with the outcome as long as it was in his will. I faithfully stayed the course as the next few weeks beat me down. Between the angst, the adversity, and the doubt that just dominated my mind, I ran to God and I sought him desperately and consistently. I knew this was the only way I could get through what was going on. I felt like I was in the middle of a fire, and it was that moment that the Lord said, Salim, I am refining you. In the heat of suffering, God gives us grace to endure. So it's like that goldsmith that uses heat under the melting pot to bring the impurities to the top, which are skimmed off, leaving only the pure gold behind. In the same way, God uses our suffering to bring out the impurities in our lives and removes them. At this point, he was showing me that I craved security and comfort way too much, that my joy came from circumstances. I had peace when everything was good, but now he was showing me that peace isn't a life free of conflict. Peace only came from being fully surrendered to him. So as I waited for that call from the doctor, I continued seeking the Lord and surrounding myself with people that genuinely cared about my situation and kept me on track. Looking back, it was the support of my wife, closest friends that kept my focus on Jesus and not on the what ifs. They kept reminding me that the Lord is in control and he will use all of this adversity to glorify himself. I kept thinking, this is why I exist, to bring glory to him. So during this time, I experienced peace and calm in the middle of the storm. Exactly 3 weeks later, I received that call and the results came back and the surgeon told me it was benign. And I remember how elated I felt, how relieved I felt, how small my faith was when I lacked trust in him who would care for me whether that tumor was cancerous or benign. I also remember thinking I wouldn't have changed the circumstances of the last 3 weeks because the tests that I faced produced faith. It showed me that in this life you will face trials, you will face problems. It also showed me that even though we face trials and problems, we can take heart because Jesus has overcome the world and he is with us until the end of age. If we put our faith in him and trust that he is our good shepherd, he will lead us beside peaceful streams, even in the midst of chaos. As disciples of Jesus, we must use hard times to harness who we really are in Christ. I had been tested, and what I found is that I had so much growing to do. I had been broken. And until the earthen vessel is broken, the treasure within it can't be seen. Likewise, as our brokenness is exposed, Jesus is seen. It's glorious to know that a Christian's suffering in this life isn't a denial of who Christ is, but an affirmation. As we experience hardship, every test of living, God finds us transformed into pure gold for his glory. Will you allow the storms in this life to grow you? While storms break you, it is an opportunity for the treasure to be seen in you, only if you allow Jesus to be seen.